So flattered to be able to sit up here and share a little bit of time with Nand Mulchandani. Doesn't really require an intro. I think everybody knows who he is. What I want to do opening though is I think a lot of people know what you're working on and sort of know you by, I mean, more by title and by organization. I don't think a lot know sort of the journey and the commercial side of the coin, right? You popped on a lot of DC radar with the Jake, and now you're sort of a known entity. What's pre sort of Beltway bandit time for you look like?
Wow, that was a good one. And yeah, softball, man. And thanks for dressing up for me.
Just for you.
I don't know if you know this guy, but the way he rolls, I actually dressed up for you today. So, so great question. So, my sort of origin story, I like how I just like popped up on the radar. That sounds kind of interesting. So to take you all the way back, I was actually born in Mountain View, California, of all places, literally like ground zero for tech, as you can imagine. My only regret is I wish my parents had bought up like large parts of that city and then sold it to Google later. But my dad was in the semiconductor industry, actually one of Fairchild Semiconductor, one of the OGs of the entire sort of chip market. As a kid, I remember, and I've never been able to figure out if this is real or I just imagined it, as walking around sort of the factory floor. And, you know, and in those days, I guess, that part of it, you didn't wear bunny suits or whatever. But just literally from the origins of the semiconductor industry, after I got my CS degree, headed straight back to Mountain View for my first job at Sun Microsystems. I'm a compiler guy at heart, a geek. I did chip design, compiler programming languages, compiler design, compiler optimization stuff. Started my first company in '96, back when the intranet was supposed to be the hot thing. I still have literally, I think it was a Business Week, which was talking about the potential of the intranet and how that was going to change everything. This is 1995 or 4. Started our first company, Oblix, which we sold to Oracle. It was in the identity and access management space. Started my second company, a company called Determina, which was in the zero-day vulnerability protection space. We pulled a team out of MIT, sold that to VMware in 2007. I ended up starting the VMware security business. Third company that I took over, actually, I didn't start this company, called OpenDNS, which was in the recursive DNS infrastructure space doing content security. That was with Dave Ulevich. I was now in Andreessen. Cisco acquired that company for a boatload of cash. And last company was Scale Extreme, which I spun out of Excel Partners, and that was acquired by Citrix. So that was kind of my one phase of my career. Ended up in a midlife crisis. Ended up at grad school for 2 years, and then it was Stanford GSB, and then Harvard Kennedy School. And then the weirdest of weird things, General Jack Shanahan, that I think everybody knows him well, was starting up the Jake after doing Project Maven. And through a classmate, I got an introduction to General Shanahan. And I was in downtown DC for something, and he sends me this, like, he didn't respond for 2 days to the email intro, sends me a last minute email saying, I've got 30 minutes in like 15 minutes at the Pentagon. Can you show up? And I'd never been to the Pentagon. I just show up at the front desk. I'm like, hey, I have this general, I'm meeting with this guy. And the guy's like, get the hell out of here. And then Suzanne, who's his XO, came down and saved me. And I hadn't had time to prep about what this Jake thing was. And so Shanahan launches into this thing where he's like, Jake is really important for the country, and we're going to do this thing, and Jake's really important. We're going to do all this work for it. Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, who the hell is Jake? He's like, must be his boss. So I was like, yes, sir, Jake's really important. We're going to do everything for Jake. And finally, then I Googled him, and I was like, oh, Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. And then one thing led to another. I joined on. General Groen is here, who took over for me after I was acting director. And yeah, that's my story. I have a lot of stories about like play acting a 3-star general at the Pentagon. That was actually a funny, cool part of my life as well. So Sorry, that was longer than you expected.
That's great.
What the hell?
It's important
It's
to bring
time,
everybody
it's been
along.
lunch,
Right? You got to set the
everybody,
stage. We
excited.
get them ready. We'll put the hook in.
Oh, okay.
So you talk about sort of the career though, building, scaling, private tech, sort of on the relative kind of cutting edge, right? Having that midlife crisis, going back to school, and then arguably traveling back in time from a technological standpoint, and getting into the DoD, where like the cloud is still becoming a new thing to people. What surprised you the most? And then sort of an inflection on that. What did you expect but not see that you thought you came in? Because everyone, I think, on the outside, on both sides of the aisle, right? Or both sides of the fence, folks in the government have all of these ideas of, what VC and startup, and it's ping pong and scooters and vests and beer. And everyone in the government is just like an effing suit, walking around doing quad charts to nowhere.
Yeah.
Right. So what did you think you were going to see that you didn't see?
And I think my DoD journey, I think, is different from my CIA journey. And let me see if I can tackle both. Well, one of the things that so now I'm a 5-year grizzled veteran of the government. And so 25 years, 5 years. So here's what surprised me most. And it wasn't a surprise thing. It was just I think a little bit of the Silicon Valley attitude that we bring to the table in terms of what that meant in our outlook and the way I approach things. So first and foremost is my entire career was on the sell side of technology, not the buy side. So that's actually a very, very big transition to make from building products to buying them. The dynamics are different. The trade-offs you need to make are different. The strategy is different. The talent is different. Everything's dramatically different. That was number one. Number two, over my career, right, from 91 in the Valley to now, Silicon Valley has changed. And it's actually reinvented and changed like 5 times over, right? Back when I was there, we call it the computer, and I still call it the computer industry. It's not the computer industry. We don't build computers in Silicon Valley anymore. We build them for different purposes, which is selling ads and clicks. But back when I was there, we were designing chips, we were doing operating systems and compilers and really hardcore tech stuff. We have gone asset light in the Valley, right? So this idea of building tangible things. Now, things are coming back. Actually, it's very interesting to see how hard tech is coming back. And hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about sort of GovTech and American dynamism and leaning into it, companies like yourselves and others selling to government. So one big shock was this idea of like there are actual physical things that people actually operate with tech that we have to deal with, right? You're not going to get airplanes to fly and boats to, float and other things there. This is all stuff that we weren't doing in Silicon Valley. And I was like, oh my God, I've discovered a whole new world. And coming from the Valley directly into DoD was just a massive, massive shock. The scale at which the place operates, the global nature, and this is the same thing with the agency. It's the scale, the scope, 24/7, nonstop, can't fail, level of precision. This idea of the Valley attitude of let's MVP this thing and worm our way to something that's good, in many, many cases, it doesn't work. And so these mindsets, just that closing that gap, I think is a big one. The other is, and this is actually even more palpable to me at the agency, is the scale and depth of tech that gets for an organization the size that we are. I call it sort of shoe phones to internet scale software and everything in between at depth, at scale. Because the mission that we're given is so broad and wide, we have to be ready for everything. And there's no off-the-shelf app store for spy software or spy tech that we can buy or build. So we've got to build a lot of stuff. We got to build it at scale, the level of precision we need to make, the fact that our adversaries are jamming us. In the Valley, you can have competition, but you won't have competition to the point of, physical harm or people breaking into shit and stuff like that, or supply chain of, so the level and scale, the intensity, the CI issues, these are all considerations that are brand new to me.
Yeah. So you talk about sort of the complexity, some of those externalities, right? The adversarial aspects, or it's a different sort of type of competition. From an internal standpoint, right? One of the biggest differences I think I've seen from a traditional sort of pure play commercial industry or tech company to something inside the boundary is prevalence and access to data.
Yeah.
Right. We take it for granted on the outside that, hey, right, the benefit of the cloud is because I can do things at scale and I can access all sorts of different data and I can run a Snowflake integration if I need to and index all this great stuff. You go inside. And one, there's not just one inside, there's like 72 different insides. And two, the data isn't shared across. So how are you, as you're sitting sort of at the helm, thinking about what is the future? And this is sort of the pivot question into GovTech and all of that. How are you thinking about what do you and the agency, what are you guys contributing in that can actually allow that commercial tech or emerging tech to scale value and to scale impact?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And actually, let me even step back and set the context even deeper, right? Which is working at a spy agency, it turns out that people actually, walking in, I was like, well, this whole stuff you see on TV and movies is just a meme. And, yeah, of course, people, it'll be like any other organization, just getting shit done, everything. People really live there, training there. I mean, it truly is a spy agency inside and outside. And so number one is the tradecraft that everyone is taught is pick a rock and hide under your rock. And I don't want to be under the same rock or near you. Like, go find your own rock. What has happened, obviously, over the past, since this 75-year-old spy agency was created, is tech now is all about scale. It's not about bespoke. It's not about hiding under rocks. It's about operating out at scale. Scale.
My shoe phone needs to talk to your shoe phone.
You're my shoe. Yeah. Exactly. And we can't do this. So the ideas in tradecraft of spy work are completely incompatible with the trends that we have in the tech market. So the cultural gap that we have to close is this idea of blending the best of tradecraft that we have to do while operating on these networks and on the internet and in tech land, which is all about scale and signal. And we are going through this gigantic pivot as an agency driven by Director Burns around, obviously, this pivot from CT, counterterrorism, to great power competition, where tech is not only the battlefield, it's an area that we are spending a lot of time on from an analytic perspective, which is brand new. We have to buy this tech. In many cases, we want to buy off the shelf as much as possible to get on the commoditization curve that commercial products offer us. Whilst at the same time, we have to build a lot of the stuff there, in which case we're trying to take pieces and bits and components and hand assemble something that is so bespoke and so unique that obviously is not available to our competition. Yet at the same time, we have to build it so it's reliable, it's secure, it scales on these networks in this technology. And then on top of it, the data issue that you pointed out, right? This is a place, and one of the other weird things for me working here is the imposter syndrome aspect of working there. And what this means is I'll be in meetings now where people will say stuff that literally feels it's on a movie set. Like, I think I'm being punked. And, because the type of stuff we do, and everybody is so lax, but so relaxed about it. Today, for instance, I think this is probably not classified. I assume we have a
this is a safe space.
This is a safe space.
Everyone will keep it a secret, right? We're good.
So, Director Burns, we had our staff meeting this morning. I dressed up for it as well. That's a whole nother story, by the way. It's like just the dress code and kind of that. So we're having our staff meeting and everybody's kind of doing their updates one at a time. And I'm sitting there thinking, what the hell is going on here? What are they talking about? These are like, if there is a, room that you imagine in the back that's like running the world, with Director Burns with a, white cat sort of thinking through sort of how the world is working. that is that room. And there is this aspect of like, how did I get in here? What am I doing here? And my updates are so mundane, right? Compared to all the other sort of mission updates that are happening. It's amazing. It's an incredible piece. But beyond the sort of imposter syndrome out of it, when people say things like, if this data gets out or this information gets out, people could get killed. In every other context I've been in, if somebody said that, you'd be like, get out of this. Like, I mean, you're crazy. This is a place where people can say this with a straight face. So all of the balancing that I talked about, right? The cultural balancing, the technology balancing, the scale, the bespoke, the tradecraft issues, everything, the CI issues, the supplier issues, the investor issues, all of these issues are things that we have to take into account. So it's not just an easy of like, let's fix acquisition, let's fix procurement, let's go talk to more startups. It's a much more complicated problem for us, at a whole other dimension and layer.
It's interesting talk about sort of the complexity, right, of what we may see is a single sort of horizontal surface. Hey, it's the market.
Yeah, correct.
Right. There's all this geopolitical complexity, and you look at, post World War II and post Australia and globalization writ large has complicated a playing field. And now capital isn't capital, and a startup isn't a startup. How does that, given the sort of broader push out of some aspects of the organization to do more engagement in VC and with startups, how is that complexity of sort of the corporate supply chain? How is that complicated? How you guys are thinking about engagement and kind of where you're able to even look at dropping in a little bit and kind of doing some actual engagement?
Yeah. So, boy, that's a complicated question. So let me break it up into
softballs only.
Yeah, I know, man. No, this is great. So one thing I could start with by talking about is just the mission of the CIA. Because actually, one of the things that I realized is I had never actually even checked out the website till I was interviewing. And we actually have a website. There's actually a ton of information on it. It is surprising. People are like, even worried to go to the website sometimes. So, and yeah, exactly. Tracking cookies and all that stuff and things. But and actually, during my interview process, it was really funny because as the interviews were set up, the recruiter would give me the names of people I was going to talk to, and you Google them. Like Andy McCreadis, our chief operating officer, you Google him. There's like one photo of him in 37 years of work. One grainy photo. I couldn't even tell his, like, what's the deal?
Black bar across the eyes.
Yeah. David Cohen, right, he's got a good Google piece, but this idea of the deputy director of the CIA, I'm on a WebEx with him, and how does one even prepare for, sorry, this is a digression, but I thought you'd all enjoy this. How do you even prepare for an interview with the agency, with these people, right? So I think at one point during the conversation, I said something like, well, according to the Bourne movies, this is the answer to your question. And David, who's got an amazing sense of humor, comes back and he's like, how well do you know the Bourne movies? And I was like, oh shit. This is not good. This is not going to go well. And he said, if you really knew the Bourne movies well, you know that everything evil done in those movies is done by the deputy director. I was like, is that a threat? Was that a threat or a statement of fact?
I'm in.
Yeah, exactly. So mission of CIA, we are a foreign intelligence agency. And I actually thought that the CIA, could operate domestically, and we were like tapping everyone's phones and blah, 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 et cetera. I can't confirm or deny anything, but the fact is our focus is outside the United States.
Second, feel your team looking at me. I'm not going to ask a clarifying
laser eyes. No, it's great to clarify this because this actually puts incredible guardrails and focus on what we do, how we do it, et cetera. So we're a foreign intelligence operation. We're primarily a human intelligence operation, although we do all source, which is we integrate other forms of intelligence that we get from across the IC. We integrate it together to do our work. Covert ops obviously is something we do at the behest of the president. The other idea was this agency just sort of going and deciding to do covert ops and jumping out and, cowboying this thing. That's not how it works. We have tons and tons of lawyers. Our OGC is very, very well wrapped into our operations. Everything we do is paper trailed. So these are all things that we need to focus on. Now with this pivot to text. So when Director Burns came on board, even during his confirmation hearings, I actually just rewatched his confirmation hearings. Even when he was actually getting confirmed, he had already focused on the fact that there were 4 priorities that we were going to focus on. And he is 2 years into his tenure. He is laser focused on making sure that we as the organization drive it. The pivot to China, number 1, the importance of tech as a domain and as that battlefield, partnerships and people. And as a senior leader and a manager, he drives that with the management team every day. Got to give him huge, he's laser focused on that. So representing the tech side of it, we're doing this gigantic pivot into what does it mean for CIA to support policymakers and the rest of government with the analytic work that we do, right? Which is a primary function of the agency that I think gets often overlooked. Is I think Jack Ryan is supposed to be an analyst who then goes, crazy on the DO side. Like our DA folks are
your next midlife crisis.
That is yeah, exactly. Dude, I'm already as they say, I'm so overt, I'm covert. I actually have made a bet inside the agency that I'm actually probably the single most overt officer at the agency, and nobody is taking me up on that. But the idea of engaging with the tech industry, understanding, so we have 6 emerging tech verticals that we're following and focused on, all the usual ones, right? And I wouldn't call these emerging, the 2 of them, which is 5G and semiconductors, which, of course, with the CHIPS Act and obviously the 5G work that we've done, we're in support of policymakers inside the United States government. Now, AI is a big one, high performance computing, fintech, biotech is another big one. And then what am I missing here? A couple of other big ones there. But those emerging tech areas are an incredible area of focus for us. We have a mission center called T2MC that's been stood up to focus all of our sort of field efforts on engaging with industry, starting to talk and meet with investors, with companies in this space, with an eye towards the competitive threat from places like China and others. So that gigantic pivot, number 1. Number 2 is, again, closing this gap on how much do we need to build versus how much do we need to buy off the shelf. What's been incredible in the time that I've been there working with all the other tech leaders across the agency, we're doing a huge amount of focus on architecture, getting great architecture done, because that was actually at the DoD. When you look at the work we did at the Jake, I used to have the slide, I think it was the Empire State Building slide, where I had a little arrow pointing out saying, this is where my family thinks I work, which is up in the, up in the clouds at the top layer. And then there was an arrow, which is where I actually work, which is basically in the sewer, doing sewer work and, all the sort of plumbing and other stuff that needs to get done. I think what happens, I think, maybe on the buy side in government, I think in general, is because of the way we solve problems and go ask Congress for money, and the architecture that has been built over time has been this siloed architecture where we have to ask for money for specific things that we need to solve. And I call that the Oprah problem, which is, everybody look under your chair and everybody gets a car, right? Everybody gets money to go solve your problem. The problem is that we never take the time, we don't get the luxury of time to start building a solid foundation, right? The data layer that you were talking about, the ingest layers, the application platforms, the APIs, the dev environments, the entire cycle time for things like ATO processes for security. The foundational work never gets focused on because it's not hot, it's not cool, and it requires us to take a pause and to build that foundation. So what we're doing now at the agency, and I think the DoD is actually doing a great job at this sort of at scale compared to us, is getting the foundational elements right. And we are spending a huge amount of time getting that right. Because all the other cool stuff that happens on this stuff, right? All this LLM stuff, all this AI stuff, all this cool next generation stuff that's happening becomes easier to implement and scale when you got the right foundation.
Yeah.
If you don't have the right foundation, you're going to be building stuff that's creaky, that's not going to work. It's not going to scale. You're not going to change the methodology of how users interact with apps and data. And you're not going to get the economies of scale that you get from tech, which is, right now, when you look at government, in many cases, we get negative economies of scale from tech because the next marginal app that you build, the next system that you build becomes another management nightmare. And the only way to drive your average and marginal costs down is to get your platform right.
So talking about that, right? You're sort of oscillating in between the unique complexities of, the most prominent intel organization in the world and some unit economics, right? Demonstrating an understanding of both sides. I'll use a South Park reference here. I've heard you use it before, right? I think a lot of senior leaders, whether they're in the Hill, in the building, in the intel community, taking sort of an underwear gnome approach to business. And they're like, hey, yeah, a company does a thing. And then there's just a question
mark.
Profit.
And profits. Yeah.
And then they're sitting there and they're wondering why they're unable to cultivate a real meaningful relationship, why they can't signal co-investment or they can't trigger, any of these VCs sitting out here to sort of click an I believe, and we can get into the dynamism and all of that. But, how do you work across some of your peers and maybe even some of the oversight or, maybe that's a bad word, but the other organizations and help folks understand sort of how the market works and how a private company works, especially some of the early stage tech companies that we've heard so much about today?
Another great question. So what's been great, at least my time here in DC, has been to see the changes going on in terms of the recognition and in embracing the problem. So whether it be Congress, whether it be us, whether it be DOD, whether it be other government agencies, it has been great to see how everybody's leaning in to solve the problem. So I don't think it's a question of intent. I think everybody recognizes it, that we have to do better. We have to do, better from being a customer. We have to be better when it comes to being a vendor. And I have very specific things I talk to vendors about in terms of, when you look at the characteristic, and I was subject to that too, right? 25 years of selling to customers. Government is different and special for a variety of reasons that I can talk about. And configuring your startup to sell to the government, I think there's an impedance mismatch that needs to get cleared up. So number one piece is, there's hope. I think everybody's kind of attacking the problem, but this is such a big, giant hairball of a problem that it's not going to solve itself that way. So we're all hacking away at it. I feel there is a dam that's going to burst at some point, which is we're all hacking away at it, that it'll come through the other side. I'm an optimist by heart, by training, and I feel like we've got actually glimmers of hope, and I feel we're going to break through it. The piece, though, is that the configuration of the customer, like I talked about, which is how we buy software, how we deploy it, is of a certain kind. Now, let's talk about the supply side of it. When you're building a company, right, and having done 4 of them, you are configured to build products that effectively can get deployed, sold and deployed with very low or zero marginal cost, right? Second front systems, the work that you do, when you're tuning your sales engine, it's all about customer acquisition costs, lifetime costs, the cost of sales, the friction, the pro serve, the services, everything else, right?
See our CFO violently nodding over there.
Yeah, there you go.
Jervis.
Jervis.
Math.
Jervis and I worked together at Citrix, by the way, many years ago. So it's the same crew. So the basic concept is the CFO, the CEO, everybody wants, right? So you're effectively driving unit costs at low marginal costs, right? That's your game. Punch it out like pancakes at very good scale, generate profits, right? That's the Underpant Elves mantra. What happens, though, is that government, when we consume technology at scale and the complexity that we have, we sometimes don't want the packaged product, right? the keyboard, the mouse, and the monitor, which tends to be the terminal point of every application and system. What we want is the ability to integrate and weave that tech into something, into a complicated, gigantic hairball. So what has to happen, I believe, sort of from a bench perspective, is we've got to get better about consuming things in terms of components and things that we can acquire. That becomes a platform-centric, API-first architecture with dev environments that feed that, and the ability to consume these packages that sort of plug in. And we need the vendor base to come back and help us with that as well, which provide us those API-first pluggable components. So whether you're selling us a drone system, which, by the way, eventually has to plug into maybe a JATC2 backend of some form of an orchestration engine, or it becomes a piece of software around data or application logic that we can consume and build in. So if we're able to sort of bend these two arcs and come together over time, I think that's when magic will happen.
All right, so you give me the optimist view, and I love you for being an optimist. Give me the pessimistic view, right? How do we lose?
We lose by, well, two things. One is I call this innovation theater and tech tourism, which is we spend the next year or two or three just flying out to Silicon Valley and going to the Google campus and driving the colorful bikes.
Whole cottage industry for that now. I think you can like buy a tour.
You could actually, yeah. There are. It's like a Hollywood tour. Well, in this house is Google. There's Apple, you know, and this is Bucks, and this is Il Fornaio, right? Yeah, downtown Palo Alto. So I think there is that aspect of, now some of it is positive, which is we culturally need to spend more time with each other, learning about each other's needs and culture. But if we leave it at the tourism level and don't actually get serious about the hard work of, like I said, the sewer and plumbing work, that's the hard work. And we've got to put in the time. There is a glamour aspect of working in a place. Like, I feel like I've got an incredibly glamorous job. CTO of CIA. I can hang out for a couple
Gets
of years.
me into parties at RSA. I'm not invited to. Name dropped him at like 4 different parties I got in. It was great.
So, but you have to put in the hard work. And so actually, really funnily enough, is I thought this job was going to be sort of outward focused on, you know, the external piece, which a lot of it is working in the field, working with startups, working with VCs. But a lot of my time and energy is actually working with our tech leaders on rolling up our sleeves and actually getting a lot of this stuff done. And actually, we're making, optimistically, we are making great progress about it. And all, again, fueled by the other piece is that senior leadership, you know, taking an interest, and this is a priority. Director Burns
Creating space for you to come in and actually drive some of that change, right? Not just setting priorities, but actually enabling something disruptive to occur in a historically relatively insular, does not like to be disrupted except for the annual reorganization.
Absolutely. So CI is doing this, but also kudos to all other parts of government, right? DOD is taking this seriously. I mean, back when we were at the JAIC, you know, with DIUs now reporting directly to Secretary of Defense, CTOs that you find across the board, chief data officers. I mean, it takes time to get this stuff from a cold start. But the fact that government is leaning so heavily into this, and this is important, and senior leadership is taking the time to sit down and learn this stuff, you know, 2-star generals, 3-star generals, 4-star generals sitting down, taking tech classes. I don't know how many countless whiteboard sessions we had about APIs and platforms, you know, when both General Crowan and General Shanahan left. I could literally have them draw, I think so still, you know, API centric.
To call you up here to prove it, sir.
Yeah. But that's super important, right? It's senior leadership taking an interest and getting so deep into it with the same level of intensity that we do in the other parts of it. That's the game.
So we've got about 10 minutes left. And what I want to do, I recognize that sort of the time you've got in the chair is finite, right? What are the top sort of 2 or 3 things that you've got sort of on your professional bucket list while you're there that you want to knock out that you're able to share? And sort of where are you in that? How can folks, if there's an opportunity to help, how should folks think about it? and kind of a what's the way forward look like?
Yeah. So from a CTO perspective, we're a super small team, and the commander's intent from Director Burns is our job. So the tagline for the CTO function at CIA is, we're the BASF of teams here, which is, we don't make the things you buy, we make the things you buy better. So our job is to help raise the overall level of tech savviness, engagement, knowledge, understanding, and operations for the entire agency. And we've had tech at the agency, obviously, at scale. I mean, we've had DS&T, DDI, DS, DO, DA on all our mission centers doing tech at scale. Like, this is not a new thing. What the CTO function has done is sort of bring three differences and three changes to, or additions. Number one is I'm a horizontal function, not a vertical one. And the agency by design was more of a horizontally architected agency, the way, say, a military command would be, right? So you've got services, you've got command and commands. So I'm a horizontal function. So my job is to bind together all the work that's happening. Number two is I focus a lot more on the long term than short term. Because we're a service organization to the rest of government in many cases, we have what I call the balloon problem, right? Another balloon shows up, we're on it. And we do that incredibly well, but the balloon becomes a squirrel problem, which is we're chasing squirrels all around, and we don't get time to really sit down and rethink what we're doing for the next balloon or whatever shows up. And the third is sort of a little bit more externally focused than internally, although my time has been there. So the way I sort of approach this from a business standpoint is something that we learned in the Valley, which is the L word, which is leverage and scale. So our team is focused only on projects that can deliver 100, 1,000, 10,000x leverage. Because being a small team, you can, chase your tail all day long and get nothing done. We need to focus on structural things that can help pivot the agency at scale. So let me give you an example of, so this architecture thing that I talked about, right? Every single hour that we put into that work creates leverage and scale, because it helps us actually build that 100x leverage from a tech perspective. That's a really, really big one. The other is things around governance and portfolio management, which is really thinking through how we are optimizing all of our tech work that we're doing across a very disparate set of tech priorities. So, we're a weird organization in that we do hard tech and digital tech in a 24/7 context, in a global setting, doing this covertly in many cases, in the face of all this stuff. Building a portfolio and optimizing it becomes really, really hard because the trade-offs aren't simple and easy. So that's another big one.
You've also, just with the architecture and sort of the portfolio kind of juxtaposition, the non-sexy stuff is the stuff that will cause catastrophic failure, right? It's not a lack of a squirrel that's going to cause catastrophic failure. It's the old right, the nail in the horseshoe, and the horse fell, and the line wasn't breached, and all of that. And I almost just offer that real quick for the audience as I think we are all sort of drawn to hey, this new thing popped. Oh crap, we need one of those. And you got to put that in the gonculator. And a lot of it is setting up some of the basic blocking and tackling that's going to enable agility in the future. Right. It doesn't compromise the integrity of the system.
100%. And that actually is generically across any large enterprise, right? Those problems. Now, there's some specific things that are specific and unique to a spy organization, right? So let me talk about some of that. One thing that is hammering us and actually every other intelligence service, right? I don't know if the MSS has a CTO or KGP or whatever, but if they were in the seat having a nice conversation with you, they would probably say the same thing, which is our ability to operate out in the field from a technology perspective is incredibly compromised, right? It's getting harder and harder and harder.
It's getting smaller.
The world's getting smaller, biometrics, video cameras, and of course, this evil thing, right? The ability for the digital dust that unfortunately we throw off as, and it's a weird compromise, which is you can turn this thing off, which is a signal. You can keep it on, it's a beacon. It is always on, it's always tracking you. Everything's being tracked all the time. And again, all of the traditional IP and work that we do, we call that ubiquitous technical surveillance, right? And it's something that we both use offensively, but it's also a defensive thing that we need to deal with. So the idea of how do we operate a spy agency in this new world of tech and ubiquity and AI and all of the work where you go off, try to set up a bank account as a consumer, right? You operate on the internet where you display something that's a little bit odd, the CAPTCHA comes up, KYC comes up, all these things where it's, tech against tech now. And so just thinking through what the next generation of spy work is going to look like and how we operate in this new world, another very, very big problem that we're all tackling right now.
And that leads to the title of the talk, but something we've talked about, right? Just in my adult life cycle, right? I went from being able to move between different countries on different planes without there really being any problem with it. And it was pretty simple to now the conversation sort of you're talking about. So as you look forward into the next generation of statecraft, what's a plausible sort of scenario that looks like? What is that? How are you guys thinking about it, I guess?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a tough one. And we have very specialized groups inside, obviously, the agency that are focused on basically working through the UTS threat and, very successfully. I mean, this is where the super cool stuff that, unless you come work for the agency one day, and I don't want to turn this into a recruiting session, but a word from your sponsor, please apply early, apply often.
Everything's human.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great place to work. You will see stuff that literally you will never see anywhere else. The stuff that we do to defeat UTS, to operate in those environments, et cetera, absolutely mind-blowing. But that to me is one track, which is it's a cat and mouse game, right? We do something, they do something, they do something, we do something. It just keeps escalating, and it's going to keep on going forever. There's a never-ending game. The other piece that one needs to think about is sort of a business model pivot, which is how actually human is gathered and others. And many of you are probably tracking the rise of open source. Amy Ziegart's book, Spies, Lies, and Algorithms. There's a whole bunch of stuff around open source intelligence, which is another really, really interesting factor that we obviously embrace. We look at, we have an open source intelligence unit and team that services the IC. It's things like that that allow us to then start rethinking the business model itself. So you're not just fighting the tactical fight, the ground war. You are all of a sudden able to pivot the business model in a completely dramatically different way. Is something that we spend, at least I spend time on, my team spends time on, and we're working across the agency to pull all that stuff together. And that's actually the fun, cool stuff to look at. I mean, there's the sewer and plumbing work that I talk about, and this is the really cool spy stuff that we get to work on. What works, that doesn't work. How do we think about it in a 2, 5, 10-year time frame to pivot this? So can't give you much more than that, but we're on the clock.
That's awesome. And look, I recognize that open conversations make your team uncomfortable. So I'm grateful that you're here. I'm grateful that they let you. I'm turning around. I like it.
No, well, it's very interesting, but another director Burnsism is the idea of transparency, right? He's made it a very important point that we engage with, I think, the public a lot more in terms of what does CIA do? What do we do? How do we do it?
In an authentic way, not just a blind transmit. Here's our website.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, the level of detail that he talks about and the issues and things that he covers, I think are emblematic, and it's a sort of a role model for the rest of us in the management team. Now, it's funny because there are different levels of comfort that the management team have in going out and doing this. I don't I'm hung out to when you actually look at like the again, the sort of overtness of that, right? He and I and a couple of others are sort of on one end of the spectrum. And there are parts of the management team that actually does not want to come out and talk. And and that's fine. But as long as we're sort of conveying the right message, making sure that we're sort of being open, being transparent in as much as we can. And we're testing the boundaries almost every day. I mean, this is very unique in us being out in these forums. But I think this is all great.
Well, I certainly do. And we're gonna do a soft landing right on time since I'm also the MC here. I want to thank you. I know you've got a ton of shit to do. The fact that you're here means a lot, us as a company, to the audience as well. It's not every day you get to sit and watch someone who's got the background to you and the role actually have a real conversation. So thanks. And thanks everybody for sticking around.
Thank you all so much. Thanks, guys.